Hello everyone. I hope you won't mind, but in this video, I've taken a slight detour from my usual focus on early radio. The subject of this video has at best a most tenuous connection to early radio, but I thought it would be a nice change of pace. In this video, we will explore the history of a fascinating 17th century building, the Terry-Mulford House in Orient, New York. If you've watched my video on Atwater Ken expert Ralph Williams, you're at least a bit familiar with the house and some of its history. Now we take a much deeper dive into the history of this fascinating house. There is one caveat to this history I must make you all aware of. The history of the house goes so far back that some details are sketchy and not well documented. Some of the dates I'll relate to you may be off by a few years. I've also discovered that much of the information on the internet regarding this house is incorrect. When creating this video, I keep in mind the words of author William Wallace Tooker, who in January of 1892 wrote the following in the magazine of New England History. Tradition, with its romantic vagaries and illusionary recitals, quickly obliterates or distorts every vestige of fact, and carries the historian away into a perfect labyrinth of error. This is an attempt, at least as much as possible with the information available, to set the record straight on the Terry-Mulford house. Let's get started. Matthew Sunderland purchased the property on August 20th in 1640. That same year, Sunderland married a woman named Catherine. Her surname is unknown, and there are various theories on who she was. One theory is that she was the daughter of a man named Caleb Curtis. Little is known about Curtis. He was born around 1588 in England and died in Livingston, New York. The date of his death is unknown. Just 3 years after Sunderland married Catherine, Matthew Sunderland died, leaving the land to Catherine. About a year later, Catherine married William Salmon and had 4 children. Catherine died in 1650 and the property went to her husband William. William Salmon remarried in 1653, and his new wife was Sarah Horton, and they produced 2 more children. William died in the spring of 1657, and the property went to his wife Sarah and the 6 children he had with both wives. It was around the time of William's death that Queen Anne, the Queen of England at the time, ordered that 7 houses be built to house laborers and coopers that would cut down the oak trees in the nearby woods and build oak barrels. The Terry-Mulford house is the last of these still standing. In 1672, Thomas Terry purchased the property. The property was apparently passed on to his son, Thomas Terry II, who died in 1777. After Terry II's death, the property was sold to a man named Helms. Little is known about Helms. He apparently owned the property until 1805, when the property was purchased by Elisha Mulford and his wife Damaris, whose maiden name was Howe. She was from East Hampton, New York. In 1846, Elijah Mulford added a wing to the house. They had 1 child, Jerusha, who was born in 1782. There have been reports that Damaris's ghost may be haunting the house. Her rocking chair had been moved by past owners of the house and somehow would end up back in Damaris's favorite place, next to the window in the upstairs bedroom. In 1901, a man named Henry Heath, a cousin of the Mulfords, purchased the Terry Mulford house. 9 years later, in 1914, Heath added a huge ballroom onto the home. It was thought by some that it was built for his daughter's coming out party. The house had been vacant for many decades when Ralph and Eleanor Williams purchased it in 1979. It was a homecoming of sorts for Eleanor Williams, formerly Eleanor Latham, who was born just down the road at the Latham farm. Stay with me as I explain Eleanor's ancestry. Eleanor's father was Edward Webb Latham Sr., who married Addie Eugenia Mulford in 1874. One of their 3 children, son Daniel Terry Latham, was named after Edward's grandfather, Thomas Terry, who I mentioned earlier. Daniel Latham would go on to marry Grace E. Young. They would have 3 children, and one of them was Eleanor Latham, Ralph Williams' wife. Got that? Frank J. Turano, a retired assistant professor formerly at Stony Brook University in New York, had conducted several archaeological digs at the Terry Mulford house. The results have turned up many artifacts from the house's history. In 1981, two large stones were uncovered that turned out to be the tombstones of Elisha and Damaris Mulford. At some point in the house's past, the family's burial plot was renovated and the tombstones were removed and used as hearthstones. So much for respect for the dead. When the Williams purchased the Terry-Mulford house, it was in poor condition from decades of neglect, and the original section of the home built 300 years earlier was sinking. The walls had begun to crack, and raccoons had made themselves at home. Ralph Williams was an engineer by trade, and he came up with a plan to save the house. In the late spring of 1984, steel beams were run through the house, and then hydraulic jacks were used to lift it up off the ground. Concrete footings were poured to support the wooden posts holding up the house, and then the walls of the foundation were poured. A block and concrete foundation was then poured to support the chimney. The house was lowered back into place on its new foundation. It took many months of hard work, but the original part of the house is now level and secured for the future. Ralph Williams had been a radio collector for many years and decided to turn the ballroom into a radio museum, naming it the Voice of the Twenties. He continued to add to his museum, and his collection grew to hundreds of early radios and related items. He was supported by his wife Eleanor in this endeavor, and Ralph would give tours of the museum to various groups over the years. At some point in the house's later history, a historic marker was installed in front of the house. The marker proclaimed that it was the original site of Pekin's Tavern, a favorite hangout from the area's early history. However, later investigation by the town's historical society discovered that Pekin's Tavern was located several miles away from the property. For some reason, the inaccurate designation was never corrected, and the historical marker still stands there today. Ralph Williams died in 2002, leaving behind a corporate trust run by family members to maintain the house and museum. Ralph's wife Eleanor continued to live at the house and provide tours of Ralph's museum until her death in 2018. A majority of the family decided to spend most of the trust money into making the house a rental property. It turned out to be a bad decision. After the work on the house was done, it turned out that no one wanted to rent the property. Having a designation as an historic home and few of the attractions that families want when renting spelled doom for the house as a vacation rental. With most of the money gone and the remainder of it dwindling away on upkeep, the family was forced to put the property up for sale in 2024. The family is hoping someone will buy the property and maintain the house and museum. Let's all hope they just find such a buyer for this unique and fascinating piece of history. The historic Terry-Mulford house deserves no less. Well, that's it for this video. There'll be more to come as we continue to investigate the early history of the world's first true mass medium, radio. Thanks for watching.